Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for being here. I want to thank Best NC for adding their strong voice to this very important topic. And I was so pleased to see so many legislators here and policymakers. We're here to really talk about what I believe is the fastest and best way to improve our schools, and that is through the role of the principal. I don't think it's any secret that our expectations for school leaders, whoops, I think we started at the wrong place here. Hold on. Let me go get our, okay. Hold on, let me go get them. Sorry. Okay, what we know is if we are going to get to the place where our principals can really just lead effectively, we're going to have to use distributed leadership. In our training programs, we have spent a lot of time on the notion of distributed leadership. Our principals actually are really beginning to learn more about that, and it's a good thing because most of our principals have been assistant principals, and because of that, they are used to being delegated to. They are not used to being the delegators. And so what happens is that they become bogged down with paperwork or solving problems, and they become more reactive rather than proactive. So we try to help them understand why it is important to distribute leadership. Now, in the school, there are some common structures, and obviously distributed leadership leads to better ultimate decisions. We all know that people are more involved and engaged when they've been included in the decision making. We also know that the school community becomes a much more informed community, and they understand the issues more. And they obviously have much more dedication and commitment to the problem. Now, and of course, a healthier school climate. Some common relationships that exist in the school, some common structures, are obviously the principal and the assistant principal. In my experience, I have seen us really use our assistant principals in ways that are not worthy of all the education that they come to the school with. Really, they, because of the way the school day runs, the way principals are responsible for all of the managerial functions, a lot of times our assistant principals get bogged down with the managerial function, when many times, or most times, they are some of our best teachers. And here we are bogging them down with managerial type things that a paraprofessional could do. And so that is one opportunity, I think, for us to look at in the way that, for us to be able to better support our principals. A point that I would like to make, obviously we're all here to talk about the role of the principal, but really we can't talk about the role of the principal if we don't also talk about the role of the assistant principal. And also the role of the teacher. Who better to support our principals in their function than our own teachers? But here in our country, it's very typical for our teachers to teach all day long with maybe a 45 to 60-minute planning period, so-called planning period, but that's usually the catch-all. The educators in the room will know what I'm talking about. That's usually the catch-all for all the other types of activities that really don't lend themselves to the planning that the teachers want to do, or that lend themselves to the kinds of leadership activities that teachers could assume. So when we look at structures such as the school leadership team, department heads, multidisciplinary teams, grade levels, and so forth, we need to recognize that the teachers could really be poised to be leaders that could really help with the total functioning of the school, the total leadership of the school. But because of the way that their roles are structured, it's very difficult for them to fill that role. And some other common relationships or structures that could be used for distributed leadership. Student support team. That is, as a superintendent, I found that to be one of the most effective ways to overcome learning barriers that students bring to schools. But what we found is when we would bring in partner agencies, child-serving agencies, they were also understaffed. And they were also overwhelmed with their mission. And so many times they could not follow through on what we needed them to do with respect to working to remove learning barriers, helping with home situations, that sort of thing. And then, of course, you've got your parents. And we all know that if you're lucky enough to have a really good PTA, a really good booster club, that can facilitate a lot going on at the school. But many times, those structures can sometimes be a deterrent because there's political kinds of things that go on. These parents aren't really trained to be taking on these kinds of roles in the schools. And probably the most untapped area for distributed leadership, in my opinion, is the whole student piece. If we really empowered our students, if we really engaged them and had them take responsibility for their own learning, imagine how that would also support the role of the principal. But I want to say that we have principals out in the field today that are managing this in a very high way. And they somehow make it work. The problem is that you have to be extraordinary. And there's a lot of burnout, which is why we have such a high turnover rate in principals in our state and really across the nation. So do our principals have adequate support? What I'm showing you here is you've got two columns. The column on the right is the state-supported staff-to-student ratio. The column on the left is what it is when local resources are added. I think you can see that our staff-to-student ratios in many cases are pretty inadequate. You see one nurse for every 1,086 students. One psychologist for over 1,800 students, one counselor for 357 students, one assistant principal for 484, and so on. Teacher assistants, one for every 20 students, but that's just in the early grades. That's only counting K through 3. And in some school systems, it might just be K through 2. So changes in support. How has their support changed in the last 10 years? The teacher workforce has declined by 3%, even though our K-12 ADM has gone up by 5.6%. So 3,372 fewer teachers in the last 10 years. Teacher assistance has declined probably more than any other work group, 27%. That's almost 8,000 positions. To me, this is very concerning, and I will tell you that the reason is because I am of the opinion, and you may agree or disagree, but I'm of the opinion that we are going backwards when we start eliminating teacher assistants. If we want to really get the student to adult ratio down, the best and most economical way to do it is through the teacher assistant. Years ago, I heard a speaker by the name of Al Shanker. He was the head of the NEA, and he made a point that really resonated with me. He said, you know, we'll never find enough superstar teachers to do what we need to do for our students. Plus, even if we did, we wouldn't be able to build enough classrooms to get the student-adult ratio down to where it needs to be. So his solution, and I have grown to really ascribe to that solution, is to hire paraprofessionals and train them to the highest level to really reduce that ratio of student to adult. And in doing that, you are really able to afford it. And frankly, I would rather have one master teacher with 40 students and a couple of teacher assistants, or even one teacher assistant, than I would rather than have two mediocre teachers with no teacher assistants. So that's just something to be thinking about through the day as we start thinking about the role of the principal. And again, I don't think we can talk about the role of the principal without thinking about the role of the teacher. And I'm so pleased that Best NC has already started this work. Laborers and service workers, 16% reduction, almost 4,000 positions. Clerical and secretarial, 5% reduction, 536 positions. I think you're beginning to see why the principal is feeling overwhelmed with the role that they need to assume. Assistant principals have gone up 1%, 34 positions across the state, and also guidance counselors have gone up 7%, 245 positions across the state. So with this backdrop, we are still expecting our principals to demonstrate exemplary leadership. And we don't want any principals to use their diminishing support as an excuse for not applying the absolute best leadership in their schools. And along those lines, you have in your packets the professional standards for educational leaders. And these standards were developed by a group of very, prominent organizations that deal with educational leadership. We won't be going over each individual standard because, frankly, we just don't have time. But they are in your packet, and really, they are very similar to the North Carolina School Executive Standards. And if you are from the business sector, they are very similar to universal leadership standards. But subsumed in each of those standards, and this is just up here for effect. Obviously, we don't expect you to be able to read that, but it is in your packet. This is just to show you all the individual practices that are subsumed in these standards, just to, again, emphasize the complexity of the principal's role. And we've pulled out a few of them for you. The first one that we've pulled out, it's really even hard to get through it. It's so complex. In collaboration with members of the school and the community and using relevant data, develop and promote a vision for the school on the successful learning and development of each child and on instructional and organizational practices that promote such success. you can see that it is a mouthful. And this is just one example of what our principals are responsible for. Okay. This diagram, I think, serves a really good purpose because it shows how the interplay of the standards is very important to the outcome that we're all after, obviously, student learning. And you can see that the driver of the student learning is in that orange box, the dark orange, and you've got your mission, your vision, your core values as a driver. You've got the leader's ethical behavior, his professional norms, his or her professional norms. You've got equity and cultural responsiveness. That's all the whole culture piece, the whole equity piece. All of that impacts student learning. At the top of this diagram, you see the inputs of you need to have a professional school community. You need to have professional staff that impact the student learning. You need to have meaningful engagement of your parents and your community. And you have to have a well-running school managerially. If your school is not safe and orderly and running efficiently, none of this makes any difference. And then over to the right there, you've got curriculum and instruction and community of care and support for students. That's the piece that attempts to remove the learning barriers for our students. And then undergirding this entire system is school improvement, the concept of continuous improvement. So as we go through the day, please think about the role of the principal, not just focusing on the principal, because all of the human talent at the school can help design the role of the principal and support the role of the principal. Unfortunately, we can't take any of these standards and abdicate them. No leader can do that. The leader has to be responsible for all 10 of the standards, but the leader needs a team that he or she can effectively distribute those responsibilities to, while the leader, as Margaret Spelling said, is sort of orchestrating the whole thing. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to interacting with you throughout the day. Thank you.